I'm not stalking her. I'm not being overprotective. I just want to make sure she's fine. You promised to give her more space, remember? But what if she gets hurt or trips on something? What if something goes wrong? Dude, she goes out all the time and nothing ever happens. Besides, she's right in front of the house. Gosh, she's just a child. Anything could go wrong. Two tiny versions of me were literally perched on my shoulder, giving me conflicting advice. Not being able to cope with the indecision anymore, I stood up abruptly, rushing to the front door. Something occurred to me on my way, and I decided to pick up a trash bag so Pat would think that I simply came to dispose of the trash and not to watch her. Immediately, I stepped out of the house with the trash bag. I heard Pat screaming my name.
Brian, help me, help me.
I ran towards her voice, and I discovered the most terrible thing possible. If you stick to the end of this video, you'll find out exactly what it was. In the meantime, like this video and subscribe to this channel, if you haven't already. If you don't do it immediately, hee.
Brian, what's going on?
Huh? I'm recording a video for Storytime Animated, the best animated storytelling channel on YouTube.
Did they tell you to laugh like a witch and behave like a psycho?
I laughed. Nah, Mom, that was just me. I was trying to convince people to like my video and subscribe to the channel. It's a YouTube thing. You may not understand. Mom rolled her eyes.
Whatever, just remember to finish your video quickly so you don't miss dinner.
Sure, Mom. I smiled. Mom left the room. I clicked the record button on my camera and set the tripod up correctly as I had nervously pushed it down when Mom surprised me. I need to get a lock for that door. Looking straight into the camera in true YouTube fashion, I continued with my story. I used to be an only child. It was fun for the first 5 to 7 years of my life, but subsequently, I started feeling lonely. I had friends I hung out with, but none of them could fill the emptiness in my soul. I knew what could happen, so I decided to confront my parents about it. Mom, Dad, I have to talk to you about something urgent.
What is it, my boy?
My dad asked kindly. I'm tired of being an only child. It's so boring and lonely. I want a little brother, and I want him as soon as possible. Mom's lips suddenly started to quiver. She burst into painful tears, and Dad had to comfort her by resting her head on his lap and patting it. He looked up at me sternly and ordered me to leave. I didn't know it at the time, but Mom and Dad had been struggling to get pregnant again since they had me, but nothing had worked. All the pregnancies had been failures. It was a traumatic topic for her, and that was why she lost it. She cried throughout that night, and no one talked to me till the next day. I came back from school the next day, had a bath, and changed my clothes. When it was time for dinner, Mom finally decided to say something.
Brian, we want a sibling for you also, but it's not in our power. When the time is right, you will get one.
I nodded and continued eating. If I had said what I had in mind at that time, I'm sure my dad would have smacked me. Fast forward to 3 years later. Mom was 9 months pregnant, and it was her due date. The last 9 months had been filled with joy and happiness. My parents were overjoyed at the long-anticipated pregnancy, and I was ecstatic to finally have a little brother all to myself. Someone who would look up to me and whom I can be a good example to. We got to the hospital and waited outside the labor ward, listening to my mother's screams. She cried and screamed so much that my dad and I started shedding tears too. In true panic mode, he tried to run into the labor room and make sure his wife was all right, but security men and some male nurses positioned outside the room stopped him. The screams and cries went on for so long, almost driving my dad to insanity. A couple of hours later, the cry of a newborn child was heard, and we were allowed to go in. Dad carried his new child and kissed it. I was about to do the same when I found out that the child was a girl and not a boy. No! I screamed internally. Not a girl. Girls have too many issues. I want a little brother. I left the room without touching her. Dad came out of the room and asked me why I refused to carry my little sister. I lied, saying that I did it because I didn't want to break her. Not knowing what relationship I could have with a female sibling, I unconsciously neglected and avoided her. I think my emotional absence in her life made her want to be around me more. She followed me around, just wanting to hang out and spend some time with me, but I always reprimanded her, telling her to stay as far away from me as possible. One day, my mom brought her to my bedroom.
Brian, we're going to be unavailable this weekend. A babysitter is coming, but her main duty is to make sure you guys eat and sleep when you're supposed to, and never leave the house. Every other thing is up to you. Make sure Pat is safe.
Fine, I said grudgingly, unhappy to be stuck with Pat. The babysitter came, but she didn't care if we ate or left the house. She just ate almost all our food, watched some TV, and talked to her friends. I didn't see the point in hiring her because I did everything myself. After I prepared lunch for Pat, the babysitter, Susie, and myself, we ate in the dining section before Susie left us, leaving her dirty plate and cup on the table. I washed everything, then carried Pat to my room and locked the doors. I told Pat to take a nap on my bed while I played some video games, but she refused and insisted on joining me. I let her play and she almost beat me, but I managed to get the upper hand when the game was almost over. I was shocked and asked her how she learned to play, but she told me that it was her first time. I couldn't believe that she was naturally so good, so I kept testing her with different games, and she always put up a great fight, or just beat me mercilessly. We bonded over game playing, and this was how we became friends. The weekend flew by quickly, and our parents came back, grinning from ear to ear.
Guys, we have great news.
My dad started.
A few modeling agencies reached out to us concerning Pat, and we've decided to have a meeting with them. They showed us how the kid modeling system works, and everything is perfect. Pat will become a child model for the agency, and our lives will change forever.
Pat was a child and didn't totally understand, so she just nodded and danced because her parents were happy. I, on the other hand, was worried about this new development. I tried talking to my parents about it, but they dismissed me, saying that this was the way they could give us a better life. I finally gave up when they convinced me that it would be good for Pat too. Pat became a kid model, and her pictures were plastered all over billboards, magazines, and advertisements. I was always worried about my little sister, so I started following her everywhere, just to make sure she was safe at all times. We were flying around the world, and people were always trying to hug or take pictures with Pat. I chased them away. I even followed Pat to the restroom and waited outside while she peed, despite her insistence that she could pee alone and nothing would happen to her. Pat had paid bodyguards, but I didn't trust them totally. As far as I was concerned, if we could pay them to take care of Pat, then someone could also pay them to take her out. All they needed was the money. I became paranoid. When Pat was around 7 years old, she lost it and screamed that I should give her some space. She'd been trying to date a 14-year-old boy whom I beat up. When I simply rolled my eyes and ignored her, she smirked and said,
You know what? It's fine. I understand why you can't simply leave me alone. You have no life of your own, you're stupid and useless. You can't survive without my money, and this is why you follow me around. If you had a life, perhaps you'd be giving me a little bit more space.
Then walked off. Pat had no idea just how bad those words made me feel. I gave up my social life to make sure that she was always safe so she'd be happy and her career would boom. But this was what she had to say to me? I decided to stop being protective of her. It was a constant war inside me, but I managed to emerge victorious most times. I avoided Pat for months, and she experienced freedom like never before. Mom and Dad went on their monthly date night one Friday evening, and I was alone with Pat in the living room, watching TV. For some reason, Pat decided to stand up and go outside. She'd been doing this frequently recently, and I realized that she only did it to garner attention from me, so I ignored her every single time. For some reason, though, this particular evening felt different. I was so worried, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. Pat had been outside in the dark for 5 minutes already, and she was just a tiny kid. This is where you met me in the story, not being able to cope with the indecision anymore. I stood up abruptly, rushing to the front door. Something occurred to me on my way, and I decided to pick up a trash bag so Pat wouldn't think that I came to watch her. Immediately, I stepped out of the house with the trash bag. I heard Pat screaming my name.
Brian! Brian, help me, help me!
I ran towards her voice, and to my horror, 2 masked men were dragging Pat into a white van while she put up a fight. She screamed, kicked, punched, bit, and even spat on the men, and I was proud of her. But she was no match for 2 male adults, being a tiny kid. Terrified that all my previous fears were finally becoming a reality, I flung the trash bag somewhere and it exploded. Not caring where the trash bag had landed or exploded, I quickly ran to the van. But Pat was already inside and the van was on the move. I ran as fast as I could to save my little sister, but there was no way I was going to outrun a van. I was almost losing sight of the van when I found a random unchained bike parked on the side of the road. I got on it and continued my chase while calling the cops, telling them what had happened and telling them to track my phone so they'd know where Pat was eventually taken to. I also put my phone on silent and hid it in my undies, so the kidnappers wouldn't throw it away in case I was caught by them. The kidnappers didn't notice that they were being followed, so they carelessly took Pat to a dirty old building and chained her to the wall of a room. I hid outside the window where Pat was chained while trying to come up with a plan. While I was still standing outside, a dirty old man approached Pat. He started telling her that he'd been watching Pat on TV for a long time and really believed she was special. According to him, the other guys wanted to blackmail Pat's parents for a huge ransom, but all he wanted was to marry her when she became 18. The man asked Pat if she'd like to marry him in the future, and Pat shed tears, but couldn't say anything because she was gagged. Enraged, I jumped into the room through the window, landing on the stupid man, holding a heavy brick that I had picked up while outside. I knocked the man out, released Pat, and ran. Unfortunately, the kidnappers caught us before we could go far and tied us together in a new room. The irritating old man later came in and angrily said that he would kill both of us for that expensive mistake. He tried to beat me up, but his colleagues stopped him, trying to escape with him because they noticed that the cops had surrounded the building. The old man came back to release my sister, just so he could use her as a shield and possibly escape with her. But the rope proved too tight to remove, and Pat struggled with everything in her. The cops finally caught and arrested him, including all his accomplices. Our parents ran and hugged us, but our joy was cut short when the cops decided to arrest me too. They said that I flung a full bag of trash on my neighbor's face, causing an explosion upon impact. The man's compound was filled with trash and he sustained minor cuts and bruises on his face from the sharp objects that were also included in the trash bag. I was confused and couldn't remember the incident. My punishment was to clean the neighbor's whole compound, and while doing that, Pat decided to help me out. In the middle of our work, Pat gave me a big hug.
You know you're the best brother in the whole galaxy, right?
I laughed.
I'm also the luckiest person that has ever existed because I have you as a brother. I'm sorry about what I said before. I take it all back. Please become overprotective again.
We both laughed, and I told her that I'll try my best.
Like and subscribe if you want someone to love you the way my brother loves me. Bye. Bye.
Dad opened the flap of my tent.
Hey, Darius, I need the backyard to set up for my birthday party.
I nodded. As Dad walked back to the house, I packed up my tent and placed my belongings in my black duffel bag. That night, Dad allowed me to sleep in his car that was parked in the garage. You may be wondering what type of parents would make their 16-year-old live in a tent in their backyard, or even sleep in their car when they have a house. Well, honestly, I left my parents with no choice. Continue watching my story and you'll see what I mean. When I was about 15 years old, I wasn't allowed to go out with my friends unless chaperoned by one of my parents. While my other friends were able to enjoy life and date, I decided to stay at home. How embarrassing would it be if my parents were at the same table hanging out with my friends? My younger sister, Grace, didn't mind, but I wanted the freedom that my other friends had. I found that freedom with a group of older boys. I honestly can't remember how we began to hang together. I just remember we used to hang out a lot. But these boys lived in nicer neighborhoods than I did, and their parents were doctors and lawyers, so I was quite surprised when I realized the kind of things they did. As much as I wanted my freedom, this freedom came with choices and consequences which I didn't understand at the time. Anyway, my new friends embraced me, and to prove myself, I did everything that they wanted me to do, including skipping school. As long as I did everything they wanted, they got me new clothes and shoes and anything else that I wanted. Life was good.
Hey, Dee, we're heading to the mall. Are you coming?
Blake asked as he approached me one morning as soon as I walked through the school gates. Yeah, sure. I fell into step with the other boys. While at the mall, Blake whispered to me,
Okay, it's your turn. See that black hoodie?
The one for $250?
Yup, that's the one. If you get that for me, I'll trade you my new sneakers that Mom got me.
I nodded and walked towards the rack. Even though I shoplifted a few times before, this was the one time when my life was changed because of it. I snuck into the dressing room and put on the hoodie under my sweater. As I was about to open the dresser door, I saw a little girl looking up at me from below the door. As I unlocked the door, she ran away and called out to her mom.
Mommy, I saw that boy over there put on a hoodie under his clothes.
I tried to hustle out of the store before they identified who the little girl pointed towards, but I was caught by the security guard just before I stepped out of the door. Blake and the rest of the guys were rounded up after the security guard looked at the store security tape, and we were all taken to the holding center.
We've raised you better than this,
Mom said angrily as we walked out to the car. Mom and Dad took the rest of the day off to come bail me out of the mall. The owner was adamant that he would be pressing charges.
We don't have money for an expensive lawyer like your rich friends, Darius.
Dad said sternly as he hopped behind the wheel. During the hearing, Blake and the others were presented by one lawyer, the very prestigious Dwight Hansford, while I was represented by a legal aid lawyer who mixed up my hearing time with another client's. I was sent to 6 months in the youth detention facility, while Blake and the others got 6 weeks of community service. Mom visited me every weekend, but Dad never did. Every weekend, Mom made an excuse that Dad had to work, but I didn't buy it. After 6 months, I came out and promised my parents that I would turn over a new leaf. However, as soon as I got a chance, I was back with my boys. When my parents found out, I was grounded for 2 months. That didn't stop me. I snuck out at night and returned before my parents woke up. This worked great until Grace caught me.
Where are you going?
She asked as I unlocked the front door. It's none of your business. I glared at her.
It may be none of my business, but I'm sure it would be Mom and Dad's business.
She smiled and she turned to head to their bedroom. I grabbed her arm and yanked it until she was facing me.
Ouch!
She pulled her hand away and rubbed it. You better not tell Mom and Dad. I clenched my fist.
Or what?
I slammed Grace against the wall and slapped her. She screamed out, which made Mom and Dad run from their room.
What is going on here?
Dad shouted as Mom comforted Grace. Grace told Mom and Dad what happened, and Dad added 3 more months to my punishment. I laughed. You really think you can keep me locked away in this house for 5 months? I opened the front door. Dad growled.
If you walk out this door, don't you dare walk back in!
I pulled my hoodie over my head and looked Dad squarely in the eyes. Fine. I slammed the door as I stepped into the cold night air. I met the guys at the park where we hung out for a few hours. When it was time to go home, I asked if it was possible to sleep by one of them for the night since Dad kicked me out. They all said that they couldn't risk their parents finding out that they were keeping a stranger at their house. That night, I slept in an abandoned building. The next day, the guys pretended that they didn't know who I was, and they told me I needed to take a bath.
He's such a loser.
Blake laughed as they walked away. I spent the next 3 months begging for money for food, sleeping in abandoned buildings and taking food out of the trash as soon as someone threw away their leftovers. I thought I didn't need anyone, but the truth was, I missed my family. Mom, Dad, and even my annoying little sister. I missed them most when I saw families coming to the park on weekends. I woke up one morning and decided it was time to go home. I was grateful when I walked up the driveway and only saw Mom's car in the driveway. I knocked on the door and waited. As soon as Mom opened the door, she threw her arms around me and began to cry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I held her tightly. She ushered me into the house.
I'm so glad you're home. Go take a bath, then come to the kitchen to have a proper meal.
With that, Mom bustled to the kitchen. I went to my room, surprised to see everything just as I left it. I showered quickly and ate the meal Mom prepared before crawling into the comfort of my bed. It wasn't long before I fell asleep. I woke when someone grabbed my feet violently. My eyes flew open and my gaze fell upon my dad. He didn't say anything. Dad dragged me out of bed by my legs and into the backyard. Mom tried to stop him, but Dad was a man on a mission.
You are not allowed inside my house until you've earned your spot. You can't go away for 3 months and come back as if nothing happened.
Dad walked back into the house. Mom got me the tent from the garage. I apologized to Grace, and just like Mom, she forgave me quickly. Dad only allowed me to go into the house to use the bathroom. Mom spoke with the principal, and she agreed to give me one more chance in school. After my homeless experience, I was determined to turn my life around. I even got a job 2 blocks away at a supermarket after school. I gave most of the money to Mom and kept the rest to buy anything that I needed. One afternoon, while Dad was home alone, I headed inside to use the bathroom. After I came out, I heard some grunts coming from the living room, so I went to investigate. When I got there, I saw Dad slumped over his armchair. His hand clutched his chest. Immediately, I rushed to the phone and called an ambulance, then Mom to tell her what was going on. She told me to go with Dad to the hospital and she would meet us there. As soon as we arrived at the hospital, they wheeled Dad to the operating room. Mom arrived 15 minutes later with Grace. We sat in the waiting room too afraid to talk, too afraid to mention the possibility that Dad may not make it. A doctor entered the waiting room a few hours later.
Family of Trevor Hall? Yes?
Mom shot up from her chair.
Your husband is out of surgery. He had a heart attack, which means that we need to keep him for observation for the next few days before we are able to discharge him. It also means that he needs to keep his stress levels down. If Mr. Hall didn't get to us when he did, we would be having a different conversation. You can see him for a few minutes, but then he needs to rest. Mr. Hall, your family is here to see you.
The doctor turned to us.
You only have a few minutes.
We nodded, and the doctor left the room. Mom and Grace hugged Dad while I stood by the door. When Grace and Mom pulled away, Dad asked Mom and Grace if they could give him and I a few minutes to talk. Mom and Grace left, but I didn't move any closer to Dad. Dad motioned for me to come closer, which I did.
When I was your age, I hung out with the wrong crowd doing petty theft. By the time I was 21, I was robbing banks. Just like you, I was the only one from my crew who got caught, and I spent 7 years in prison. When I came out, I swore to be better, but with my criminal record, nobody wanted to hire me. So I opened my own car dealership. I saw myself in you, and I don't want you to have the same hardships I did.
Tears streamed down Dad's face. I hugged Dad. After a few minutes, the doctor came in and told me Dad needed his rest. Dad looked at me.
You have earned your place and saved my life. You can come back into the house.
About 2 weeks after his heart attack, Dad returned home. The weeks that followed, I worked hard to build my family's trust. One evening, there was a knock on the door and Mom went to answer it. At the front door stood 2 police officers.
Good evening, officers. How can I help you?
We're here to question Darius Hall, ma'am. Is he around?
What do you want with him?
We just need to ask him a few questions.
Mom called Dad and I to the front door.
Good evening, Mr. Hall.
One officer addressed me.
Over the past few days, there's been a series of robberies in the area. The only place that wasn't broken into is your home. We would like to take you to the station for questioning.
Dad looked at me.
Darius, do you know anything about these robberies?
No, I don't.
We can sort this out at the station,
the other officer replied.
Darius, you stay with them. I'll follow behind and don't answer any questions until I get there,
Dad said. I nodded and allowed the officers to take me to the station. Dad and a man dressed in a suit arrived at the police station about 5 minutes after we did. We entered the interrogation room and the lawyer, Mr. Mitchell, turned to the police officers.
Do you have any proof that Mr. Hall was involved in these robberies? No, that's why we've brought him here to ask questions. Do you have any evidence leading to Mr. Hall being a suspect in this case?
The officers looked at each other but didn't say anything.
My client will have no problem answering any of your questions if you find proof that he was involved in this. My suggestion to you officers is to go out and find the person who did this instead of placing blame on someone with a